Well, thank you very much for inviting me. What I want to do over the next sort of nearly an hour is go through, with regards to binoculars, is why use them. If you decide you're going to use them, what do you get? What should you look out for in the ways of what should you go for? What should you also not look out for not getting? I've got a lovely example of that here, which I will demonstrate. How do you use them? And then lastly, how do you discard or find stuff to look at? Don't worry, it's not going to be a long list. I dislike long lists about as much as anybody else, but it'll really be a few examples and then really where to get the information. As Derek's sort of indicated, I might be mentioning a couple of books in this a little bit later. Okie doke. So if we can kick off with that then. So the first one is, why binoculars? And there's lots of answers you could give, but they are really an excellent beginner's instrument, and that's probably the main reason most people get into using them for astronomy. We're told when we start astronomy, a lot of us were, start with binoculars. I already had before anyone told me that, because I didn't have anything else. I used to nick my dad's when I was a kid. But they also really are an excellent serious instrument if you really want to get into it. If you remember, just before Comet Hale-Bopp, there was a Comet Hyakutake, and that was discovered with binoculars by Yuji Hyakutake. I'll show you similar sort of binoculars, what he was using a bit later, in an image. I don't have them myself. Or if the well-known British comet discoverer, George Alcock, he also used binoculars for it. So there's indication that they are really useful as a serious instrument as well, but at a price. The reason for all of this, particularly with the beginner's instrument, if we're going for the small ones, they're very portable and they're incredibly easy to set up. How difficult is it to take an instrument out of its case, get the strap around your neck? Always do that. Binocular repairers love people who don't. Lift them up to your head and start looking. And the advantage of this, and even with my big ones, which need to be set up on a mount on a tripod, I can get those up in 10 minutes. So when I go into New Forest or Cranbourne Chase, which is where we observe most of the time nowadays, there have been times where, with my imaging friends, and I'm just happily observing, and then they're setting up polar aligning, getting everything sorted out. And then, as Kathy was saying right at the beginning, what's the weather doing? It's suddenly clouds come over, starts raining. They've only just got going. I've been observing 45 minutes to an hour. I reckon I'm winning all the way around on this. So that's the ease of setup. Even with big brutes, they're not difficult. And then there's what's called the binocular advantage, at which point you say, well, what's the binocular advantage? That's easy. It's times 1.4. What that effectively means is, if you are observing with, I'll hold these up on the little thumbnail. If you're on speaker view, you can actually change the size of these. So these are 10 by 50s. So if you're observing with two 50mm elements like that, if you're going for the really faint stuff, it's approximately equivalent to observing through 170mm. So you get this a similar thing. So what effectively you're doing is you're multiplying your aperture by 1.4 in order to get the equivalent of the sort of the faint stuff that you can see with it. It's approximate. It's mostly an empirical thing, but there are certainly reasons behind it, which we'll look at. So these are what's called statistical summation. And if you've got two detectors, then what you do is, again, I must emphasize this is only for the very faint stuff. If you have two detectors, you are doubling approximately your probability of detection when you're looking at things where we can actually detect almost single photons. So, oops, sorry, one of my screen's just done something silly. Right, So that's your statistical summation. So it's probability of detection with two detectors. But the other one is what's called physiological summation. And anybody who does imaging already knows about this. It's stacking. When you stack with imaging, you're trying to get rid of noise by two different images or more different images. The noise will be random, the signal will be the same, and it's exactly the same happens in our neural pathways. So we decrease the signal to we increase the signal to noise ratio. We decrease the noise because we cancel it out if you've got two going, and it's actually quite easy to detect this for yourself. If you take a book and you put it at a distance, hold it away from you, where you can just make out what the text is reading with two eyes, and then close one eye, doesn't matter which one, sort of give yourself the advantage, close your less dominant eye, and all of a sudden you can't read it anymore. And you probably notice this anyway when you're looking for very faint stuff. You see a lot of, you do actually see the neural noise in an eyepiece on a dark night when you're hunting around for faint. It never goes completely black. I used to do caving, and I remember once my light failed and other guys wanted to go on, so I said I'd wait for them. And I was left there in absolutely pitch dark, and then I started seeing things, which is quite interesting. You think you're going mad. Okay, but there's other things as well with two eyes. So you get this false stereopsis. Everything looks like it's in 3D. You get the same with a binocular, actually. Obviously isn't. You don't have stereo vision at things that are light years away, fairly obviously. And a lot of it's actually to do with color and brightness anyway. But it's, most of us who are visual observers want to enjoy what we're looking at as well. So it helps with that. I'm also told, although I've never experienced this myself, that you can negate the blind spot as well. Again, if you're really sort of struggling to find something to see it can fall on the blind spot of one eye, but it can't fall on the blind spot of both simultaneously. So that's one there. So how do we choose binoculars? Well, we need to decide what type first. I divide them up into 3 bits. So there's poro prisms, roof prisms, and ones with angled eyepiece. I put 45 degree there because that's what mine are, but you can get them 90. I saw one the other day, it's got 48. So poros are ones that look like this, and you have 2 prisms in here. One is a prism that turns the image the right way round, and the other one turns it the right way up. So the light comes in here, bounces around your prisms, and comes out the eyepiece. So apart from turning your image the right way round and the right way up, because as you know, astronomical images are always the wrong way round and wrong way up, unless you put reflections into them. It also folds the light path, and that means you end up with a shorter instrument, which means it's easier to mount, it's less unwieldy, so there's certain advantages with that as well. So its advantages really are generally because, I'll talk about more this when we get on to roof prisms, but you generally get the best quality in a given price range. It's to do with the prisms, and they're relatively easy to maintain as well. And if we're going to get, particularly for people starting out, some of the budget binoculars, which are remarkable amount of value you potentially get for very little outlay, but they do have issues and you do need to learn to maintain them. So that's quite important. The disadvantages are they're bulkier and heavier, and the cheap ones easily lose collimation, which means binoculars, not the same as with a telescope, but binoculars collimation means both optical axes, both tubes, parallel with the hinge in the middle. So the optical axes have to be parallel and also parallel with the hinge. If they're not, you don't get proper collimation, and somebody is going to end up getting double images, which is a pain. It's actually not too bad if you can easily see there's double images, but if it's just slightly out, then your eyes strain and you can get nausea or headaches or whatever. Roofs are the ones like this. They look as though they're straight through. I'm holding some up there now. They are, again, they look as though they're straight through. They're not. They actually have a prism inside it here. And this roof prism here does exactly the same job as the 2 prisms in the poro prism binocular. but the whole thing is kept internal, which is useful because it makes them easier to waterproof because your focusing is internal as well. You have a lens that moves backwards and forwards that focuses it, a lens in each tube. But you get issues with this roof prism where the rays are recombined on the roof. You can get destructive interference. So you have to have what's called phase coating if you're going to maintain your contrast. But they are lighter and more compact. They're much, much easier to waterproof. That's largely because your focusing's internal, whereas with poroprism binoculars it's very often external, particularly with the center focus ones. I'll show you images of this in a bit. They're more expensive, and that's because that roof prism has been made to 90 times the precision of a poroprism if it's going to work properly and not degrade the image. And they're much, much more difficult to self-maintain. I just don't bother, quite honestly. I'm quite happy to have a go at sorting out poros for friends. I will not touch roofs. And the aperture is also limited by the straight-through design. And that's sort of fairly obvious if you think about, okay, what would happen if we had, say, an aperture of 100 millimeters with that design? Well, the optical axis is going to come out at least 100 millimeters apart, plus the thickness of whatever tube you've got. So obviously your eyes aren't that far apart. So that gives a limit theoretically around about 60, but for most practical purposes, it's round about 50. You very rarely see roof prism binoculars bigger than 60 mil, and the ones that are, they usually the roof prism doesn't have to give it that sort of straight through appearance. You can offset it a little bit with some designs of roof. And then the angled eyepieces are the ones like this. These are just lovely. But the problem is you have an extra prism in here which diverts the light path, and if it's not exceptionally good glass, you're going to degrade your image. And good glass, as we discover when we start getting into this, starts costing money. But they are much more comfortable to use, particularly when they're at very high elevation. You don't have to strain your neck to look up at things, but they are more expensive because they're extra glass, and they must be mounted. The normal way, the sensible way to use binoculars is to look at whatever you're looking at and then lift the binoculars up to your eyes. Don't do, and this is particularly important for astronomy. You can sort of get away with casting around when you're looking at something on the ground because you've got cues you can recognize. With astronomy, you don't. You know, by the time you pull the binoculars up to your eyes, you're looking at something that, unless you're incredibly used to that star field, is unfamiliar, and you don't know where you're going to go with it. So you look at it and put the binoculars in the way, and if your target isn't there, you're usually almost certainly too low. So you just go up a little bit and usually you find it. But you can't do that if you've got angled eyepieces, so they've got to be mounted. And if they're mounted, they're going to need some kind of finder as well. So we're starting to complicate things. So what you're going to get? Well, binoculars, I think everybody knows, are defined by or described by two numbers, which is magnification multiplied by the aperture in millimeters. So something like an 8x40, which is slightly bigger than this one I'm holding up, can easily be handheld by almost anybody. I have a set of a dozen, actually 8x42s, which I used before lockdown for outreach work with kids. And I could just hand them out, give them a quick lesson on how to focus them and all the rest of it. And then they can just do it. They don't have to be taught anything else until they've had a little look around and got excited at what they can see. And then I can really start teaching them with it. 10x50s, which is this size, most people can learn to handhold properly. When my son was about 9 years old, I got him some lightweight 10x50s, and one night we were out and he said to me, "Dad, I found something." Okay, what is it? And he devised a star hop for me to get to it. And what he discovered, he completely, of his own bat, never having seen it before, he'd independently discovered that little open cluster M34. Which is, okay, obviously he's not the person to see it, but the point of mentioning that is, if a 9-year-old can use 10x50s, can devise a star hop, and do that, he's obviously getting, he's obviously able to use them But this is all to do with learning how to hold them properly, which I'll come on to in a minute. Something like 15 by 70s, ideally mounted. You can handhold them briefly, very briefly if you're just casting around. But really, you get so much more out of them if you mount them. And then you do get people who say, yeah, they can hold up 25 by 100. Well, yeah, they can hold them, but it's almost, you really don't see a heck of a lot with something like that. They really do need to be mounted. So what size do you want? What I'm going to show you is a series of images, simulations of what you see with different sizes of binoculars, then we'll look at them in different conditions as well. So what we've got in the middle of that is that lovely little cluster at the tail end of Gemini, M35. So in 10 by 50s from my back garden, which is in sort of country town, not quite rural, so it's a bit suburban-y garden, that's about what I see in 10 by 50s on a nice clear night. If I go up to my 70mm binoculars, you see that. You see a couple of things changing. One is you're getting more magnification. You can see a few more stars, and your sky background's getting darker because we're increasing the magnification more than we're increasing the light throughput, and that tends to darken the sky background, so it gives you better contrast as well. If I go up to my big brutes, you're getting that. So this is the difference one can get. Oops, we just need, whoops, that is going the wrong way. Sorry about that. So there. 10 by 50s, 50 by 70s, and I use my big ones usually at 37 times, 37 by 100s, and you can start seeing a lot of detail. So that makes a difference. When we do work down in say, Bournemouth or Poole, sometimes we go and work with schools down there where it's heavily light polluted. This is what you see. So light pollution really hammers it. Well, we know this. We are working on it, but it's a slow process. However, you go up somewhere, well, up your way, somewhere around Kielder or something like that, which is lovely. I was up there a few years ago. It's absolutely delightful. Or up to Loch Loyal, or around where I grew up, which was just outside Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, where no streetlights. That's what you get. And that is just so, so beautiful. You cannot overestimate the beauty of ordinary binoculars under really, really nice skies. It's absolute delight. But as we'll see from over here, aperture does sort of start to compensate for light pollution, but only a little bit. And this is why, for example, we can, you can quite easily see with 10 by 50s on a clear day, you can see first magnitude stars if you're looking exactly the right direction and all the rest of it. Right, moving on. Holding them. My wife to model this. If you can actually try this for yourself. If you look at the image of me on the screen, if that joint of your thumb there fits almost perfectly in the corner of your eye, and gives you, and the thumb bone there sits nicely on the cheekbone. And what that does is it enables you to make a stable triangle, as we can see here. Now, as your arms get higher than your head, if you're taking weight on them, they tie very quick. Sorry, as your arms get higher than your heart, they tie very quickly. You can try that. You can try this for yourself. I mean, we all know that holding arms up does get tiring, whereas holding them down tends not to. And so you start to get the shakes. Once you lock them in like that, you don't have that problem anymore. And if you're reclined and your head's supported, everything's supported as well, and you can observe for a very long time with that sort of support. If you wear specs like I do, you can still do the same. You just hook your thumb underneath the arm of your spectacles. So it's something like that. So it's all quite possible. It's and if you're observing at something near the horizon, do what the American military do, which is hold binoculars by the end of by the objective end. That's what they teach you in the American military, to hold them up like that. And then you're, again, you have a fairly stable setup there. There's almost no situation, well, I certainly haven't found one, where holding them around the prism housings, which is what everybody seems to do, is in any way the best way to hold them. You can see what Louise is doing there. She's got 2 fingers around the eyepieces, 2 fingers around the prism housings, and supporting them on her head. And it is so much more stable than this is what, when I mentioned my lad was when he was 9 years old with the 10x50s, finding M34, that's what he was doing. And it seems awkward at first. And with big binoculars, you think, oh, I'm going to drop them. You won't. And anyway, you've got the neck strap on anyway, so it doesn't matter if you do. But I've never found anyone who drops them, and almost everybody finds that so much more stable. Once they're more stable, you see more. It's not as good as mounting them, but it's pretty good. Mounting them can be a problem. Lots of people say get them on a tripod, and trigger grips on tripods are great. But you see what happens here. You've got 5 legs vying for the same little bit of space time, and it just becomes awkward. You try and put a seat or a recliner or something in there, you're adding another 4 legs to the mix, and it sort of becomes almost impossible. And you also, it's really difficult to look up at high altitudes. So I don't think tripods are that good at all. Patrick Moore used to recommend one of these. They're called neck pods. They're not. They're like little monopods, which are supported on a strap around the neck. And you can adjust the height here, because as you're looking at higher altitude stuff, you need to stretch this because your eyes go higher, obviously, and adjust the angle here. And it's like a little monopod supported on your chest. Also, acts as a very, very good pulse rate monitor, because that's resting on your sternum there, and you can actually see your pulse. There are other ways to see your pulse with astronomy, but that's certainly one way to do them. A monopod with a trigger grip head like that is what I do almost all the time with my bigger binocs nowadays. So here we've got some, I'll just stop the screen share because it'll actually make it easier to do that. Okay, so here we've got the bigger binoculars. Here we've got a trigger grip ball head. They come with a standard mounting plate, and in true Blue Peter sense, here is one I prepared earlier. So that mounting plate just goes into that like that, locks in place. This bit here sits on your monopod, and you just move it around like that. And it's so comfortable, and it hardly adds any bulk to what you carry around. I mean, obviously it is slightly more inconvenient than just an ordinary binocular, but it is not that much more inconvenient. Where are we? There we go. Okay. It also doesn't have to be vertical, as I discovered after I burnt a hole in one of our garden recliners just between my legs, so that I could have that almost vertical in it, and found out immediately afterwards when I was trying to observe with it, well, actually, it's just as stable with the monopod going down the side and at a bit of an angle, so that's quite good. Ian's asked, is the mounting plate a standard thing? Well, it is, but there are several different standards, so you do get different ones. So that is a standard, one of the standard Manfrotto ones. It wouldn't fit, for example, the trigger grip head that you've got in that in the slide that's on screen at the moment, because that's a completely different standard. So it's like astronomy, isn't it? It's, and computing. Standards are wonderful, so many from which to choose. But if you stick with a certain type of kit, then yes, there are. So and you can buy those mounting plates separately. So I have anything that I want to mount in my binocular bag, Where's my binocular bag for that one? Oh, over here. So in my 50mm binocular bag, I carry the same sort of kit as well, because if I decide I do want to mount them, then it's already there and it's nice and easy. Yeah, and Adrian was just saying he's just trying, looking at the timing on that, it's that triangular grip, that one with your thumbs in your eyes. Yeah, it does feel more stable. Most certainly does. One way of getting around this problem with all your legs in one place is parallelogram mount, which holds, in this case, binoculars offset from the tripod. And they're great for that, but they're also great because as you raise and lower this parallelogram, the binoculars stay pointed at the same thing, which means for something like outreach, it's really, really easy to find something, adult to find something in the sky, and you can just drop the parallelogram and still pointing at the same thing, so kids can see it. I really love my parallelograms. I've actually got 3 of the beasts. Here's another one. This is the one with a longer arm. So what's here, I'm standing, the tripod hasn't moved and nothing's changed apart from my position here and bring the recliner in. Or I can effectively lie down and observe really, really comfortably. So you have that flexibility. I have been known to fall asleep, things like that, because it is just so incredibly comfortable. Love it. You don't have to go to that extent. I tend to use any old gubbins. You know, if I haven't got the kit I want with me, so if I'm using my handheld binoculars, which I keep under the passenger seat of the car for emergency use, I'll just use anything that's around: fences, trees, car roof. In this instance, a cheap little beach chair across a recliner. There it is. This is really high tech. You've got a swivel chair there. You know, I have complete freedom of movement in azimuth. Using that as a rack, or this is a window cleaning squeegee, about 4 quid's worth. Poor man's monopod. Very nice because you've got that cranked head there, and that enables the upright bit to clear astronomer's belly, which might be a useful thing to do as well. And where that hand is there, you've got height adjustment, and you know, it's actually, you're only limited by your imagination in what you can actually do to steady your binoculars if you don't have the ideal thing around you. Or there's the other extreme. Those are the sort of binoculars Yuji Hyakutake was using. This is called a star chair. It's essentially, it's a computerized mount that you sit in. So you can dial in where you want to go and it just takes you to it. So, and there are now people sort of making things similar to this, hacking apart old, SynScan controls and stuff from mounts, and controlling mounts with drills and bicycle chains, and it's as I say, it's only limited by imagination. Dew is a problem the moment you mount binoculars, because normally if you're using them, if you're hand holding them, they're going to come down quite often, so they're not constantly pointing up at the sky. Once they're pointing up at the sky, they are going to get dewy if they're held up there, and nothing ever comes with a long enough dew shield, so you need to extend them. This is just cheap exercise mat. I have a Rigel quick finder on my big binos as well. Nice because the outer circle of this is 2 degrees, and the with my favorite eyepieces, which is the 37 times there, this has a field of view of 1.8 degrees. They're pretty similar. It makes star hopping an absolute doddle with that. But they're not quite as good as Telrads at dew detection. Telrad's a much better dew detector than this, but they're still pretty good. So you do need dew shield on it. Otherwise, it's going to you're going to have to end up wiping it, which means you scratch the screen and all the rest of it. Okay. I mentioned focuses. Center focus is this. You have an eyepiece bridge, except with very few models. The Pentax SP is an example where actually that has internal focusing as well. But most of them focus by moving a rod here up and down, which moves your eyepieces in and out. And it makes it, 1, difficult to waterproof, and 2, the eyepiece bridges rock. If they rock, they're going to go out of focus. So for astronomy, we tend to prefer individual focus. Much easier to waterproof, and you don't have that problem with the rocking bridge or anything like that. And it's not inconvenient because you only really need center focus if you're going to keep refocusing, which for terrestrial stuff you might want to do. But once you're focused at infinity for yourself, you don't need to refocus anymore. So it's really not a problem. So what do you get? Excuse me. Well, buying advice, good old internet buying advice. I don't know how many times I've seen this. Well, as long as you get binocular with back 4 prisms, fully multi-coated optics, you can't go far wrong. What rubbish. We'll see why. So section of binoculars, some of which I've still got. And we're going to look at these two in the middle here. And what we'll look at is what is written on the cover plates. Now, say they're made in the same factory, United Optics in Kunming in China. So this one here, broadband FMC, that stands for fully multi-coated. Fully broadband multi-coated, how different can they be? Back 4 prism, back 4 prism, how different can they be? 15 by 70, 15 by 70. Come on, surely they can't be that different. Well, let's first of all bust this myth about back 4 prisms. It stands for barium crown. And the much derided borosilicate crown glass, which is BK7 often, round the periphery, you don't get full total internal reflection of the peripheral light rays. So you could just see in here, I had to actually tilt it a bit in order to do that. I couldn't take it straight through. You can see you've got little gray cutoffs in there. So around the periphery of your image, it's going to be slightly fainter. Well, really, how difficult is it to move something that's the periphery to the center for using handheld binoculars in particular? You don't have the same thing here with the back 4 prism, and that's because you get more internal reflection. It's a denser optical glass, got a higher refractive index. But let's just look at something else at the moment. Which one of these has got better stray light control? That's much brighter around there. Actually, I think I'd prefer those. Well, I did prefer those. So they do internally reflect more light, but they've actually got worse transmission dispersion properties as well. So, it's horses for courses. But back 4 is what everybody wants nowadays. BK7, anybody into bino viewers will probably heard of Denkmeyer, some of the best bino viewers on the planet. And guess what glass they use? Yep, BK7, because the BK7 has better transmission and dispersion properties. But the thing about back 4 is it's not actually a designation. Schott AG, German glass maker, they used it as one of their references, and it's got, don't worry necessarily about what these are, but Chinese back 4, and notice the slightly different capitalization here, is actually a different glass altogether. But for a lot of stuff, it's just an advertising gimmick. Excuse me. So you've got this advertising gimmick here. Okay, this doesn't matter so much. The refractive index and the critical angle is slightly different. And dispersion, in fact, your dispersion is slightly better, which is nice. The big problem with this stuff is it's not a barium crown, which is what BAK stands for. It's actually a phosphate crown glass, and it has a 100 times higher inclusion allowance, which means, little particles in it, bubbles in it, or anything like that. And the result is that you get a really sort of much more milkier view from it. And the easiest way to see this, compare them, is actually on a nice sunny day with bright flowers, and you can see they look washed out with something with the Chinese back 4, which is not really barium crown. So be careful with that. There's a lot of advertising hype in binoculars. Much more important with prisms, actually, is how they're held in. This is a fairly decent binocular here. Standard mounting plate there, Ian. And the prism is actually held in a cage, which you can see here. It's got little bits. It's held in with a proper strap, which is screwed at both ends. That's not going to come out easily. This one's actually got a groove in the hypotenuse as well, which is a useful thing to have. It actually stops a few spurious reflections. What I did take off before I took this image is it also had black covering around the outside to stop stray light getting in. So it's really pretty good. Your modern budget Chinese binocular, if you're lucky, the clip that holds the prism in is screwed in at one end. Quite often it isn't. It just clips in both ends. And this is not a very stable way of doing it. And this is why if you knock one of these too hard, the prism slips and you get a double image. So, well, look at that. A bit. Fully multi-coated. Well, what's it mean? It's an advertising term. There's no industry-wide standard. It could mean that, air glass surface with 2 layers, or it could mean all your air glass surfaces have properly applied 7 layers. They're not the same thing. And we can see that here. These are the 2 binoculars, both apparently fully multi-coated, made in the same factory, and one has much better anti-reflective properties, the innards, than the other. Okay, so I think we could say that doesn't really tell us much about what we need to know. It's advertising hype, but surely this must. Well, let's find out. If you put a parallel beam of light into the eyepiece, and the beam is at least as wide as the exit pupil of the eyepiece, okay, what comes out the other end is a beam of light which is the same size as your free aperture, which is what I've done. It's essentially, it's just a laser pointer and it's a finder, actually, or finder scope being used as a beam broadener. You don't have to go to this extent, as I discovered later. What you get is this. I apologize for the image. I'm not much of an imager, which is why I stick with optical binoculars. And you put a scale across there and you can measure this. Now, these are so-called 15 by 70 binoculars. They're not. That measures 62 across there. So they're actually 62mm binoculars. And I'll show you how and why they do this in a bit. You don't have to do this. If you use the camera flash on your phone, for example, as long as it's coming back about sort of 4 to 6 inches, you're only going to be a few percent out. Or, you know, you can use a focusing torch, which we will do in a bit anyway. And that's the sort of you get. So actually, they're not even 70mm binoculars. Another way to do it, another standard way to do this, not the sun, but just a clear sky. Hold a bit of graph paper up behind it. You can just about make out that's graph paper, and move it backwards and forwards behind the eyepiece until you get the sharpest image you can here, and that is the size of your exit pupil multiplied by the magnification, and you will get the aperture. So this is what we got. Laser gave me 62. That's really precise. LED torch gave me 65. It's because it's not parallel, so it doesn't. But you know, it's percent, isn't it? And exit pupil gave me just over 60mm. But the important thing is it's not 70. So that's not quite true either. The 15 is approximately correct. Okay. These are things which are much more important, and you're not going to be able to find them out unless you either dismantle the binoculars or you know, somebody has done so and tells you about it. Because actually, these are only things really that you're ever going to find out unless you hold these up to your head. You hold the binoculars up to your head, and if you like them and they compare well to other binoculars you use, that's the way to do it. Don't be taken in by advertising hype. Things to avoid, well, are BSOs. We'll have a look at what that means in a moment. There we go. Right, let me just get that out of the way onto there. So, kept under wraps, we have my favorite or least favorite set of BSOs. It's a binocular-shaped object. It is one of the worst things I have ever come across. These retail for 80 quid, and they are appalling in every sense of the word. So let's just have a look at a few things with this. I just need to turn my light out and reorientate my camera because I want to use the ceiling as a screen. It's good for demonstrating things. Just excuse me a few seconds. up to the ceiling. Hey, that'll do. Okie doke. So first of all, these have a number of things. You might have noticed it's sort of red at the front there. This is the latest ruby coatings. Now, coatings on binoculars or any lens surface, they're meant to be anti-reflective coatings. So let's look at the effect on the ceiling, which is currently just being illuminated by my screen, at the effect of decent anti-reflective coatings when I use a light that shines, where are we, that bright. So those, whoa, yeah. Where are we going? There we go. If we got this almost straight on, hardly any light coming off these. And that's because they've got decent, proper anti-reflective coatings on. Now let's look at the latest ruby coatings and what they do. There we go. That is not an anti-reflective coating. What it's doing is it's rejecting the red end of the spectrum, so you don't have to have proper color correction. Don't worry, it gets worse. Okay, let's take some proper 70mm binoculars. Let's just get that up there. And do the bit with shining the light the wrong way through them. Now that, we'll use the light fitting on the ceiling as a sort of scale. And you see that this light beam there just about covers the entire light fitting, which is just over, well, it's just under 80mm aperture. Once we do it with these here, it only just covers the light itself in the middle. And the reason for that is this thing I was talking about, them stopping down the aperture. Let's look at that. I could probably see it with this. No, I'll pop the lights back on, be easier. Sorry, small space, lots of binoculars. So, if you look into the end there, into the prism, you see that actually there's a diaphragm around the opening into the prism housing. And that actually stops this light. So it's not a 70mm as it pretends to be. It's actually a 50mm effective aperture. So why do they do this? Well, once you get into your optics, you realize that the rays that are most difficult to control are the ones at the periphery. So rather than controlling them optically, if we just mechanically shut them out, we get a sharper image. It's effectively increasing the focal ratio. So you get that. But this has another few things as well, which are worth mentioning. You want to see a rocky eyepiece bridge. That's terrible. And this lever on the side is a dead giveaway. This is a zoom lever. There is no such thing as good zoom binoculars. At the low end of the zoom, which is 12 times, it's like looking down a toilet roll tube, only the image isn't as crisp. And at the high end, which is 60 times, well, they're unusable. But let's be, you do get your value for money with these, because you do get 2 images for the price of 1. It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible to merge the images with this. Yeah, there's just no such thing as a good zoom binocular. There are no exceptions to that. They can't do it. And the reason they can't do it is that in order to make a zoom binocular that zooms accurately 2 sides at once in exactly the same way would be so expensive. Nobody would buy them. And you know, really, what's the point? So you've got the rocky eyepiece bridge, you've got this red end of the spectrum chucked out, which means that what you're looking at has this sort of deathly blue-grey to it. You know, it looks like the entire universe has undergone some sort of zombie apocalypse or something. Doesn't focus accurately at all, so everything's in soft focus. I'll say 2 images for the price of 1. Am I scathing about them? Too right I am. They're terrible. Okay, let's go back to the screen. Probably just about had enough of me whinging on about those. Okie doke. So that's BSOs, binocular shaped objects. So avoid zoom, avoid ruby coatings. They are a gimmick, or gold coatings, or anything else that isn't anti-reflective. Avoid focus-free binoculars because you can't focus them. They're set to what's called the hyperfocal distance, and your eyes have to do all the work. Might be sort of okay for cheap things, for sort of use on the land. They just don't work for astronomy. And the other things to avoid are the things like the Tasco zip focus, where you've got about a quarter of a turn of the focus wheel to go from whatever its close focus is to through infinity and beyond. It's just too fast. The other side of that is something like these, which are the little Vixen 6.5 by 32s, like individual eyepiece focusing, but it's a variable speed focus. So as you approach infinity, the actual rate of focus slows down for whatever your turning of this is. It's very, very, very clever the way they do it. And it makes it an absolute doddle to get really precise focus, because once you get near infinity, quite a lot of turn on the focus ring, there's a very, very small change in focus. While I've got these out, you probably noticed most of my binoculars have these things on them. They come in various sort of camo things. Take them off that one. They're called Bino Bandits for reasons that are about to become obvious. There you go. Or if you want to, the real Lone Ranger look. And they shield your eyes, which is great, and it I think gives a much more immersive thing. I've put them on all my binoculars now. Unfortunately, the import has just increased the price enormously, which is a pain. They also have these little clips on. So once they're on your binocs, let's demonstrate on these little ones here. You can use those clips to hold the thing together over the top. It acts like sort of like an emergency rain guard or something like that. Really, really very nice. And certainly was a bargain at the price before they put the price up. Okay, so what are we going to look at? Well, there's things binoculars are good at and there's things binoculars are not good at. You'll notice I don't have planets on there. You can detect Uranus and Neptune quite easily, but you don't get a lot of detail on the larger planets. It's really not the instrument of choice. If your thing is planetary observing or really lunar observing, binoculars, unless you get the very, very expensive ones, which you can put high power eyepieces in, really aren't worth it. Derek's put on there, what about stabilized bins? I'll come to those at the end, if I may. So these are things we can look at, and it's mostly, well, it's entirely deep sky stuff, really, I think. So these are all 10 by 50 simulations, suburban black sky, unless I tell you otherwise. So Andromeda Galaxy M31. Yeah, you can see brightening to the core. You can see the light this side cuts off more quickly than the light this side. And that's telling you actually this is the side closest. So we're actually detecting the dust lane. You actually let your eyes really get used to it. You can actually see quite a lot there. Or we can go to a very large faint galaxy, which is actually covering quite a lot of that, but it's very difficult to see. That's M33. Planetary nebulae. That's why I put some planetary nebulae in it. It's a very small value of some. This is the big, easy one. This little fuzzy splotch in the middle there. You can just about make out with 10 by 50s that it's not circular. And that's about it, really. That's the Dumbbell Nebula. All other planetary nebulae are more difficult and smaller. So this is not really your thing of choice there. Globular clusters. Well, second biggest one we can see from here is M13. And the bigger one, which is M22, is so low down, it's actually hardly ever looks bigger. And that's all you see. You don't resolve anything. Nah. But once we get onto asterisms, which are patterns of stars in the sky, they're not official constellations or anything like that, just groups of stars that people have noticed and said, hey, that's nice. So when I first came to England, my mate Bob Misen, I was observing with, he said, look, it's like a wristwatch in the sky. You know, there's a bit of the strap, there's the watch face, there's the other bit. But it's actually got the name Kemble's Cascade. In the 1970s, Lucien Kemble, a Canadian astronomer, publicized this to his friends. And at this time of year, in the evening, this is almost vertical in the sky. So you can imagine it's like a little ribbon waterfall. And there's a little cluster at the bottom, NGC 1502, which looks like a little splash pool at the bottom. And it's beautifully framed in binoculars of this size. And it's just delightful. And to, you know, if you're getting people interested in astronomy, showing them something like this, it's just one of those little wow moments. Isn't that nice? With these little binoculars here, it doesn't look anything like as good. It looks like a grey hair that's been pinned to the sky with that. So yeah, it doesn't. Eddie's Coaster. This is named for Eddie Carpenter. Unfortunately, died earlier this year at a good age, I have to say. He was part of Cotswold Astronomical Society, and he spent decades showing this to people. This bright star at the bottom here, the south, is the middle star of the W of Cassiopeia. So if you put that at the south end of a 10 by 50 binocular field, then what you're getting is this here in the middle. And it's this multiple curved group of stars, all these curves here. And Eddie thought, well, it looks a bit like a roller coaster. And he'd been delighting people with that. And, you know, he discovered that. I'm sure other people had seen it before, but nobody actually noticed it. And if you spend a lot of time looking at the sky, you will see things that maybe, hey, nobody else has noticed that pattern before. I found one which I thought I've found a new pattern in the sky I was noticed before, and I discovered. Well, I wasn't quite. Everybody else had noticed a pattern within it. So I'd seen a triangle with a triangle within a trapezium within a triangle, and everybody else just saw the trapezium bit and call it mini Cass. So that's a little thing up in Draco. But, you know, I've found loads of other things as well. There's a bit in Orion, which I think looks a bit like a broken bicycle. So there's, you know, have a look, discover things for yourself, make your own catalogue of things. Your name doesn't have to be Messier to be able to make a catalogue of things. If you're enjoying it, just do it. The coat hanger, Colander 399, Al Sufi's cluster, Brocchi's cluster, whatever. Lovely to show to kids again, because it looks like something they recognize in the sky. So those are asterisms. Beautiful open cluster coming up at this time of year, Colander 70. And normally, if you look at something, if I'm doing this at a proper club meeting, you say, who's seen Colander 70? If you're lucky, about 10% of hands go up. But I reckon you've probably all seen Colander 70, but you just don't bother looking at it because you go down here almost immediately. These are the 3 stars of Orion's belt. And we're surrounded by this beautiful, hot, blue-white stars, massive open cluster, and it's really, really lovely in binoculars. And most people are, oh, right, well, it's Orion's belt, so we just use that as a way to get down to the nebula. This is so much nicer than the nebula in binoculars. It really is lovely, and you need the wide field anyway to see it. It's got so many nice little curves and that. You know, I could tell you that, hey, we've got this S here, which is, you can remember S for Steve, who told you to look for it. Or if that sort of puts you off looking for it, that's just the head and neck of a swan. And there's its wings there. You know, you can imagine what you want in it. And there's so many with this. You find more and more of these curves and twists and knots of stars. You know, it's worth a good 20 minutes. M45, once you get binoculars on it, you see so many more stars. It's, as people say, you know, it's like somebody just chucked diamond dust over black velvet. A bit late now, but you go down to M24 down the southern Milky Way in the summer. There's more stars in this, and you'll see with 10 by 50 binoculars anywhere else in the sky. You will never count them. It's called a star cloud for a reason. We used to go down on Purbeck to observe, and have a star party there. And so, oh look, there's clouds on the horizon. Yeah, it was clouds. It was this cloud. Absolutely lovely. And then with big binoculars, something like M42 is really, really, really lovely. You can spend ages at it and just see more and more and more and more detail, but it does require a little bit more magnification. So that's some ideas of what to get. So how do you find out? Well, a bit of self-promotion, I'm afraid. Sky at Night Mag, every month I do a binocular tour, which is just 6 objects. They're nominally 10 by 50 or 15 by 70s. Anything that says 10 by 50 on it, I can see in something 40 mil or smaller, and that's because of this stopping down problem. The Chinese binoculars are just a lot of the 50 mil are actually stopped down to 42 mil. So I use that, or I use these 32 mil because I'm actually quite lucky. Even though I'm sort of, in my 70s now, my eyes still open quite a lot. I've always had extremely good night vision, and it's sort of hanging on there a bit, which is quite nice. So you need to make sure, because a lot of beginners are using this, that people can see that. And anything that says 15 by 70, with the exception of one, which I wish I hadn't done now, I can see in 50 mil binoculars. And the one was something, it's just a lovely little double star. And people say, well, I can't see it. Lots of complaints, can't see it. And that's probably because they were using, what are effectively 62 mil binos. Or I write a monthly newsletter, which is completely free. Get it off the website, which is there, binocularsky.com. It's usually about 8 pages or so. Mainly the deep sky stuff doesn't change much from year to year, because the deep sky doesn't change much from year to year. But also mention the binocular planets, Uranus and Neptune, anything else we can see. So here we're mentioning Ceres as well. You don't see any detail or anything on them, but you can actually do a little bit of astronomy on them, and they're quite good. Or you can go also on the website. Really, I did this as an exercise in trying to teach myself how to program databases and stuff. But if you go to the objects selection bit in the observing tab, you can put in your latitude, put in the altitude of your horizon. That's, so if you've got trees up to 25 degrees, you don't want me showing you stuff that's always going to be below the tree line. Size your binoculars, put in any other criteria you want. You can multi-select these if you want to. Order in which you want your details. So here we've got open clusters in Cassiopeia visible in 70 mil binoculars, and they're going to be at least 25 degrees above the horizon. If you're 53 degrees north, hit submit search, and you'll get this, and it'll tell you various things that you can see. Or if you don't want to do it like that, there are also maps which are like this, and there's a color code key next to it. So the yellow is globular clusters, orange is open clusters, white is asterisms, and so on and so forth. You hover over the thing, it'll tell you what it is. You click on it, it'll take you to an object page. So let's pretend we're clicking on that one there, which is Kemble's Cascade, which Adrian's mentioned in one of his comments. Well, I'll come to the image stabilized comment later, Adrian, if I may. It tells you how to find it. So this is nice and easy. Cassiopeia here, Eddie's coaster just up here, so don't miss that. You take this distance here, and you take it exactly the same distance further on, and bang, you're on it. Easiest way to do it is your fingers up like that. Get your fingers to the right distance, just shift them along. Again, if you don't see it, raise your binoculars a little bit, because you're almost certainly too low. So it tells you what it is, tells you how to find it. And the bottom part of the page will give you a conventional finder chart with a circle, which is going to be the approximate aperture of binoculars, a little bit more about it, and approximately what you'll see of it. So trying to do that. I've got nearly 300 objects in there now. and my aim is to get to 600 while I'm still on the green side of the turf. So I better get a move on, I think, probably. It's taken me a long time to get to that. Once I got the first couple of hundred in there, I sort of slowed down a bit because I felt it was good enough. So that's that. Or as Derek mentioned at the beginning, there's the books as well. So binocular astronomy, somebody said it's the most comprehensive book on binocular astronomy ever written. I'm not going to contradict them. Well, there's this one. I said right at the beginning that you should people to start with binoculars. Nobody tells you how to in a book. So that was the idea of this one. It was just to an idea that you can follow the system in here. It's basically 2 parts of the sky per month. And by the time if you follow everything right through to the end of the year, you'll have a pretty good knowledge of the northern temperate skies. So that's the idea of that. You can download full-size color charts because it's only a small book. So I wanted to keep the price down, and the star charts in it are therefore very small as well. Couple of other things. I've said a few unkind things about Chinese binoculars. But let's just think about those 15 by 70s that I had a pop at. You can get those for about 50 quid. How much does a single halfway decent astronomical eyepiece cost? Probably at least that much. And you're getting 2 eyepieces, 2 objective lenses, 2 focusing mechanisms, all your prism housing and other gubbins associated with it for the cost of 1 eyepiece. What quality and quality control is it reasonable to expect? And the answer is probably not a lot. And what they've done is they have brought medium aperture binocular astronomy to hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of people who would never otherwise have been able to do it. Because until the Chinese started bringing out these very, very cheap binoculars, it started with the Helios Stella, which were about 150 quid. But then they went on to these very, very cheap ones, which have got very poor quality control, to say, and they don't tend to last very long. But for 50 quid, when before you'd been paying 600 or 700 quid for 70mm binoculars, has really opened it up for people. So I think, yeah, they're not perfect, but they have really brought things to a lot of people who would otherwise had it. And my neighbor had some, had them for a while, dropped them once, they fell apart. So he's now got a pair that I have, which I usually use for demonstration at things like this. But, quite frankly, they're sitting on my shelf for most of the time. You might as well, they're much better if he's using them. So that's that one. Other things people usually ask about are mirror mounts, which are the things where you, in fact, if I just stop the share, it might be easier. Mirror mounts where you have the binoculars, you have a mirror down here, down at the bottom here, and the binoculars look down onto the mirror. Whoa. Like so, and you move the mirror to get changed in altitude and that. Some people love them. I really loathe them. They collect everything. Dew, dandruff, biscuit crumbs, you name it. It ends up on the mirror. And everything's reversed as well. I just find them a real pain to use, quite honestly. And the other one that's Derek's mentioned, asked about, and Adrian's mentioned, he said, best ever view of M31 was 15 by 50 image stabilized binoculars. I can believe it. Image stabilized binoculars are an incredible invention, I think. Certainly, if I get older and shakier, I'll probably get some. But the new ones, the Canon, and it's really the Canons are really the leaders at the moment, and they're priced as though they are as well. I was reviewing some for Sky at Night Mag, and held them up to my eyes, and I made them shake by tensing. So they're shaking like mad. Looking through them with the image stabilization on, you've got a perfectly steady sky with the binoculars shaking around it. It's weird, and it is stunningly good. And so with but even with the original, the stabilization wasn't that good. It was a bit sort of swimmy. The original 10 by 30s, I think there were cannons. You could see more with 10 by 30 image stabilized than you could with 10 by 50 handheld. So that's the sort of pickup you're getting. But when you look at the price of them, I think, okay, I would probably want at least the 42mm cannons if I was going to get image stabilized. For what they cost, I could get 2 of these on monopods with trigger grip heads, and I can see much more with this on a monopod and a trigger grip head than I can with those 42mm cannons. So yes, if you need the portability, they are fantastic. They really are. But if you're interested in, sort of bangs for your buck, as it were, for me, not yet. But if portability became more of an issue, then absolutely no problem with them. They are fantastic technology. And with that, I shall say thank you for listening. If there's any questions, please do unmute and ask and everything else. And I'd be very, very happy to try and give sensible answers to questions if you got them. Thank you. Shall I unmute all
questions? Can I just thank you for a fascinating and full of very useful information talk. I'm sure you'll get several more visitors to your website as a consequence. So,
well, yeah, just buy one of the books for everybody you know for Christmas. A little bit.
Why not? Why not?
Somebody already has.
Excellent.
Thank you, Sean Malone.
I got one last Christmas.
I hope you find it useful.
Oh yes, yeah, definitely.